vote, which is why we work so hard for registration, restoration, and ensuring access to the polls to be sure that each person who wants to vote can do so. And we believe in the power of each citizen's voice, which is why we host candidate forums and education sessions to be sure that every person is equipped with information to act on the issues that affect their everyday lives. But making meaningful and lasting change often requires people to act together. We're fortunate to have with us today 4 people who have committed themselves to organizing and leading people across Alabama to make positive change in their communities and in the state. You'll often hear them giving all the credit to the local advocates and activists they work with, but our panelists have each been instrumental in amplifying voices and building power. Each of them saw the need for change in Alabama and decided to lead and organize others to make that change. So today we're welcoming Carla Crowder. She is the Executive Director of Alabama Appleseed. Ramsey Sprague is the President of the Mobile Environmental Justice Action Coalition. Shalela Dowdy is also with us from Mobile. She is the second Vice President of the Mobile branch of the NAACP and the founding President of Stand Up Mobile. And finally, Evan Milligan, who is the Executive Director of Alabama Forward. Thank you all so much for being here. First, I wanted to ask each of you about your journey to where you are now and what motivates you to do the work. So Carla, I know you've had quite a journey from journalism to law to public policy. Tell us about how you got to where you are and a little bit about Alabama Appleseed.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thanks y'all so much for inviting me to be a part of this great panel. So I am a native Alabamian. I grew up in Florence before Florence was cool, and was kind of flailing about in college and landed in journalism. And it was really fun as a 21-year-old new Huntington College graduate to be able to challenge the mayor and the police chief down in Montgomery. I was covering crime, which is what they often put novice reporters to cover as crime in the police department. But pretty quickly, after writing over and over again about some of the same themes, the same violence that was not being properly addressed, the same kind of hardships in certain communities, I started looking beyond what was happening in those neighborhoods and wondering why we didn't have better systems in place. Is this all there is? Why do the same problems keep happening over and over again, and all we're doing is locking people up and building more prisons? So I got real disenchanted with traditional crime coverage at newspapers. And frankly, I got real disenchanted with Alabama, and I fled for a few years. I left and I moved out west. And then I got real guilty because I kept looking back to Alabama and seeing all the things that John talked about. We were worst in this, and then best, highest in everything that's bad that we want to avoid. And I felt like I love this state, and this state is better than all these statistics. So if I wanted to keep fighting the fight, I needed to do it in the place I loved the most, and with the people I really cared about the most. So I got a job at the Birmingham News and really got enmeshed in covering the crisis in the prisons, over-incarceration, the problems with the death penalty, and realized after a while that I couldn't pretend to be an unbiased, neutral reporter, that sometimes there were not two sides, and that became crystal clear for me when I was writing about the wrongful conviction of Anthony Ray Hinton. Many of y'all may be familiar with his case. Brian Stevenson at EJI represented Mr. Hinton, and he's written a book. And the Attorney General's office, which was fighting to keep Mr. Hinton on death row and to, frankly, to kill him is what they wanted to do, would call and complain to my editors about me sharing both sides of the story, the evidence that this man was actually innocent. Thankfully, my editors stood behind me, but they always insisted, you got to talk to the victim side. You got to talk to the Attorney General's office. You got to put their perspective in the story. And I struggled with that and had a really hard time with that. So I went to law school. Because I wanted to be, I went to law school to get people out of prison. I visited a lot of our prisons as a newspaper reporter, and I knew so many people did not need to be there. There was no reason for so many women to be locked up, no reason for so many old men to be stuck in prison for crimes that happened decades ago. So that's why I love the work we do at Alabama Appleseed. We are a public policy and research nonprofit first and foremost, but when I joined as executive director in 2019, I recognized the opportunity to leverage the crisis in the prisons and the fact that the federal government is again suing the state of Alabama over unconstitutional prisons. And we have a moment to step in and say, mass incarceration is not working in Alabama. It's not making us safer. And we're too poor of a state to afford this system. And so I've thrown everything I have into trying to lead the way toward solutions to public safety outside of caging our fellow Alabamians. So that's what we're working on, whether it's fines and fees or drug policy or increased mental health, or looking at the number of aging people in our prisons and finding ways to get some of them out. All of our policy and research and legal work is around economic justice, fighting mass incarceration, creating more racial justice, and government accountability.
And next we're going to go to you, Evan. You also moved to advocacy from a law background. What was the vision of the people who founded Alabama Forward, and what made you decide to get on board with building this fairly new organization?
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
There's a tiny button right here. Tiny button on the side. Great.
Oh, I see it. Teamwork. Good afternoon. So to answer your question about the vision of the founders, there was a steering committee. Well, let's back up. There have been coalitions of grassroots organizations in Alabama since at least, however long we can remember. Then there were certainly some that started formalizing differently in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. There's a graduate of one of them who's in your ranks. It's the first time I met Cindy Lowry, we were a part of a grassroots leadership development program that was sponsored by a group that then was called the Alabama Organizing Project. And for those of y'all that have been working at this stuff for a while, that included the Federation of Child Care Centers of Alabama. At the time it was called Focal, Greater Birmingham Ministries, Federation of Southern Cooperatives, Alabama Arise. Eventually HECA joined, and then the Alabama Council on Human Relations. So those were like some of that's one example of a standing coalition that existed to train up, develop leaders in social movement work here in progressive organizing. People had different issue areas. Cindy was always focused on climate and the protection of Mother Earth. I was more looking at quality of life for Black communities. There were some folks that were focused on whatever the issue was. So those kind of things are not new. Now what happened is there's been this development of an infrastructure on the progressive leaning side of our culture in the country over the last, since about 2004. This is not that so they have different models. You have some folks in that infrastructure that want to really look at how do we organize donors in a state to give to philanthropy, to give to 501c3 organizations, not just a few months leading up to an election, not just when there are these high profile national incidents, but on an ongoing basis to fund work year round. So those kinds of organizations are called donor tables, donor alliances. In Alabama, that organization is the Alabama Alliance. Some of y'all know Eva Kendrick, y'all might know Monica Riley, they work with them. You also have some organizations that are really focused on strengthening the capacity of grassroots organizations who often don't have a room in their budget to hire a person who comes with journalism training, like Carla's friends in the journalism community, or who have a lot of digital media production background. So they're called comms hubs. And then the one here in Alabama y'all may have worked with is called Alabama Values, and also Alabama Values Progress. Now, both of those organizations that I just mentioned are less than 3 years old. The Comm Club here is less than a year old. Alabama Forward evolved out of a steering committee of progressive leaning social advocacy groups who said they wanted to build an institution that basically serves the needs of those folks working at the ground level or state level advocacy towards pro-democracy values, pro-democracy objectives, to make sure that they have sub-grant funding coming in, that there's training, that there's an overall convening, coordinating body that can really help to keep people inspired, to make sure that people in the different regions of the state are aware of each other's work, and that there's also an eye looking at what are we doing now in the early 2020s to impact what our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are inheriting in 2051 and 2050. So really looking 30 years down the road at how we set ourselves up to build an Alabama that's worthy of their presence. And I was able to learn about this effort. Really, we have been working. My wife and I have been working at EJI for a while, and this is pretty much, nonprofit social justice stuff is pretty much what I've been doing for a long time. Had an opportunity to work with Carla for a while. Was always her big fan, even before she joined the staff. She was. This is a total side note, but just to point why relationships are important. In the mid 2000s era of EJI, that's before Brian gave that TED talk. That's before you had those Supreme Court wins, before some other things that sort of catapulted the organization to a different level of media attention and cultural affection, even in this state. EJI was only really known by hard progressive leaning lawyers and a couple of journalists here and there, and maybe folks that just really love studying who got the Reebok Human Rights Award, who was nominated for a MacArthur, like people like that. Otherwise, people weren't really coming to EJI. And so when you look for folks in the state who were, especially in media, who were covering stories in a way that felt like it humanized the client and it actually put the work in a broader context, Carla was one of the few who had that witness. And so at the time, there was no museum, there was no memorial. When we would give tours, all we had was pictures of the clients that were on the wall and then blown up versions of media coverage. And so on that wall, when I would give the tours to the kids that would come in, she had like 5 articles. So it gave me pride because most of the journalists on the wall were from New York Times. There weren't really many Alabama-based journalists that had that witness. I say all that to say that the relationships that we have in this room and also in this space are really unique. And we're at a very interesting point in time to see the scale and the scope of resources that we have available to grow work, hopefully in a way that's informed by those relationships. I think it's a very unique time for that. Also very unique time for some of the challenges that we're responding to. So,
Shalela, I'm going to ask you next. Tell us a little bit about what keeps you going. So when I did some preliminary work, like getting to know these folks, I just could not believe all that Shalela does. She coaches. She's in law school. She's active in leadership with NAACP, continues to support the work of Stand Up Mobile. How do you do all this?
Well, you kind of answered my question because I was going to get the background on where that question came from. But I think I'm able to do all this just because of my life dynamics. So I'm the oldest of 10 kids. The second kid came along when I was about 14 months, and they just kept coming. And so I've been leading within my family. Some of the entities that I participated in growing up, the JROTC program in the high school system, a lot of people think it's a program to matriculate you into the military, but it's not. It's a leadership building program. And then I decided to go to one of the top premier leadership institutions for undergrad by choosing to go to the United States Military Academy at West Point. And so I feel like organizing and advocating ties back into leadership. And so I have all this experience of leading. I was on active duty for 6 years and lived in Oklahoma, Texas, deployed to Bahrain with the undergrad in New York, South Carolina, and did a stint in Atlanta. And while doing all that, I was still registered to vote in Alabama. I was coming home on the holidays and I was paying attention to what was going on back home, but I also was able to have a viewpoint on what was going on in other states. And so what motivates me is knowing that there's work to do in the state of Alabama. There's work to do. We have the people. We just have to organize and figure out what our issues are, what our problems are, and come up with some strategic solutions on solving those problems. She said, I am in law school, and so what I have to balance right now is being an advocate in Alabama while also attending law school classes in Louisiana. And so thankfully I'm at Southern University in Baton Rouge, so that's only 3 hours from Mobile. So I'm in Louisiana on the weekdays, and I haven't really gotten that involved in anything going on in Louisiana, but I'm a part-time evening student, so I have 3 more years there. And it'll probably happen just because it's me, but I've been able to focus on Mobile on the weekends, on the holidays. This summer I am doing an internship with Legal Services of Alabama in Mobile. And so I'm able to do all of that also with great mentors, a great support system. Stand Up Mobile, and this might be one of my follow-on questions, but was founded by 2 women who, they're 75 right now, and it was founded about 2 years ago. And so being able to be mentored by some of our elders in the community, trying to motivate my peers to get involved, millennials in Mobile is a struggle, and Ramsey can talk about that, or he can relate, because he's also the 3rd vice president of the NAACP branch in Mobile, and I'm the 2nd. But just motivated by my natural ability to lead, and knowing that Alabama can be great. We just have to do the work.
I think you're next. So when Shalela is busy in law school, you're holding it down in Mobile for her, which is fantastic. But you know, what really brought you into environmental justice work? Because that's the main focus of what you do.
Yeah. I got involved with environmental work right out of high school. Really in high school, I was one of those kids that would pamphlet my own high school with things. Kind of unusual. And then when I graduated high school, instead of going into all the college groups, I went to the adult versions of all the organizations, and I was managing a lot of nonprofits, including several environmental nonprofits in the North Texas area. I grew up in Arlington, Texas, and began organizing. Left Arlington to organize in Fort Worth, and moved to Fort Worth and lived there for about 10 years. It was with a number of, actually, I was telling Darlene this, the league in Tarrant County League of Women Voters was really formative. My belonging to them, my membership in that group, and being able to learn from, their decades of experience, and probably cumulative 100 years of experience in the political system among all the elders in that group, and I was definitely the youngest by a lot. But it was very, enriching, and the language of environmental justice was foreign to me up until that point when I started reading through like federal policy briefs and this and that. And this is like the year 2001, 2002. The environmental justice executive order by President Clinton, EO 12898, was, that was issued in 1997. Environmental justice as a federal discipline was extremely young then, and so the bodies were saying, well, we don't know, environmental justice is new to us, but you're a young person of color. What is environmental justice? And so I was like, I don't really know, but we should be doing it, right? And so there's this overall question. I didn't really get into that niche at that time. It took many years for it to really click, to make sense. and it was really, I'd come through Mobile several times. I traveled cross country on bicycle, and traveling from Mobile to Pensacola on bicycle, for anybody that knows the geography, you don't want to take a bicycle into the tunnels. So the only other way is across the Africatown Bridge, and that's how I got familiar with what Africatown was. I'd never heard of an Africatown, and was immediately reading the historic signs. The historic markers. I was suffocated by the oil fumes and the asphalt fumes from all the heavy industry in the area, and that was my first real impression of the community. Although I had met some descendants from the historic Clotilda slave ship previous to that, and hadn't really connected the two. But I returned after I got involved with fighting the Keystone XL pipeline in Texas and Oklahoma, as part of a direct action campaign after the Obama administration approved it. All the nonprofit groups, Sierra Club, all the big greens that were involved in the original Keystone XL campaign basically cut all of the Southern individuals that were the frontline community leaders off. Said, sorry, it's not our priority anymore. The administration's approved it. We can't really do anything for you. And so direct action rabble-rousers decided to commit to fighting the pipeline to continue to raise the issue and get some fundamental shoring up on the issue, especially for the northern segment. And it was that act of solidarity with indigenous communities that really drove my hand in that work. But going public with that, my friends in Mobile said, we have a pipeline, tank farm, and intermodal transmission station that they want to put across the street from the first accredited black high school in South Alabama, the Mobile County Training School. And I said, that's terrible. Where is it? And they said, Africatown. I said, say no more. So I went back to Africatown shortly thereafter, got familiar with the community, and that's when, like I said, environmental justice had been in my field of awareness, in my periphery, but had never really come into really, really distinct focus where I was fully committed to working with the community and in that way. And you know, MEJAC, Mobile Environmental Justice Action Coalition, was founded by Africatown residents in partnership with regional stakeholders and advocates. And I was just a volunteer for the first several years. And the group asked that I take over with facilitation duties and take on the role of the presidency as we transitioned into a 501c3 to develop more community outreach and develop the legal infrastructure work to challenge some of the outrageous permitting practices of Alabama Department of Environmental Management. So that's how it kind of, environmental justice found me, and I accepted.
So I'd love to dig into both of y'all's work in Mobile a little bit more. What have you done to mobilize communities between Stand Up Mobile and the Environmental Justice Action Coalition to build local power? And have you been able to change the conversation in the communities through local activism?
So yes, we have. Stand Up Mobile was started in 2001, kind of around January 6th. Miss Amelia Bacon and Beverly Cooper, I think they're both 75 now, so I guess they were 73. They founded the organization, and one thing that motivated them was the upcoming municipal election. So we know people typically vote more so every 4 years in the presidential election, but turnout in our local elections are not that great. So they started Stand Up Mobile with the focus of bring awareness to voting, specifically in our Black districts within the city council. And so they raised some money, because you can't just go out and talk to people sometimes. Sometimes you have to bring something to them resources-wise. So gave away food, had an advocate from HUD that was there to talk about fair housing, and then we brought the voting piece. Well, when it comes to engaging about voting, it's not just, hey, make sure you vote. It's a multi-tier process. So education, mobilization, and then on election day, sometimes you have to partake in transporting them to the polls. And so we wanted just to increase the turnout during the municipal election and really just focus on the Black vote. And so the 2020 census was complete, and then redistricting came up. And so voting and redistricting go hand in hand. And so Santa Mobile picked up the mantle to advocate for an additional minority city council district within the city of Mobile. Mobile is about 52% African American, and our city council district, the makeup of our city council didn't really line up with what the city dynamics were, and so Stand Up Mobile took the mantle and kind of mobilized the community. And from January of 2022 until about August, when the city council voted on the new maps, the org had about 3 people speaking at the city council meeting every Tuesday, and it was great to see the community organized in that manner. I would get phone calls on like, hey, such is going to be speaking, we need you to educate them on redistricting, because everyone did not understand it, but some of them had voices, such as some of our religious leaders. We had a lot of pastors get involved, so it was great to see the community come together to advocate for that 4th district. We also worked with SPLC when it came to the map drawings, and we kind of got that 4th district. We have 3 districts that sit at over 60%, and the new one is 52 or 53%. But what happened is, right after redistricting, our city did a push for annexation, which we knew was coming, which means bringing in more territory, more people, and kind of undoing the work that we just did with redistricting. And so we did the same thing. The exact same thing, just mobilizing members in the community, but we kind of had less people than what we had for redistricting, because people are kind of torn about annexation because it could bring funding and resources to the city. But it was just great to see the work that Santa Mobile has done, and it really has become the premier organization in the city when it comes to organizing, when it comes to anything related to voting. Unfortunately, even trumps the NAACP, I would say, at this point. And it just goes to show the work that the org has done in 2 years has been very influential in our local communities.
And I'll just echo all that and say that I moved to Mobile 10 years ago to volunteer with MeJack full time as a form of community defense, because I said I was doing direct action to stop the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. We wanted to be able to saber rattle, to put the fear of major exposure, national exposure, and the shame that would bring on the powerful people in the room that were trying to push that project in Africatown, and the bevy of all the other economic development projects that are inappropriate for the community that they want to put on all the vacant land out there too. And ever since then, I told everyone who would listen, especially the women in the room, if y'all got organized and would accept leadership and just stick with it, there is a deep bench of people who will lift you up and lift your organizations up and help you succeed in what you're trying to do. And I'm really, really, everything that Stand Up Mobile has been doing is right on time in my book. Mobile is desperate for an infusion of youthful and creative leadership and new visionary leadership, and I think that can come from the sort of work that Shalela and Ms. Bacon and Ms. Cooper and all the others in Stand Up Mobile have been doing. I've been doing extracurricular organizing with some other coalition efforts, and the mayoral elections in Mobile, not unlike everywhere else in the state, are very high stakes, right? It's everything. The council has so little authority over what happens in a mayor-strong city. And so the efforts to do the community organizing haven't always bore fruit. But to see that this newest iteration is really inspiring to me. And I'm not that much, I'm older, but I still get lumped in with the young people a lot. I'm blessed in that way, I guess. But I have a lot more years under my belt as an organizer than most folks readily recognize. And I've done electoral campaigns. I've been a state campaign director for a political party. I have a lot of experience in that arena. But I thought I understood the depth of what it meant to be where the bottom of a red state in the barrel would go. That's the wrong metaphor. I thought I knew what the bottom of the barrel in a red state looked like moving from Texas, and Alabama showed me that there really is no bottom. There's no shame. There's no shame. But I did understand the dynamics of coming from a blue island in a red state. And Tarrant County is often considered the reddest big city in America for a lot of reasons. But there was still these undercurrents of resistance and dynamics that shaped the political discourse and what came out of the city as policy. And I see all those things playing out in Alabama. And really it's just who and among the younger people are being reached out to by the elders to fill these seats that are being left open so often. And that's what I see what's happening with Stand Up Mobile. It's so important. And with me, Jack, and with Africatown, we really are trying to do that in a much more systematic way with the elders, deliberately building a bigger table for younger people to sit at and really hear all the wisdom that's collected over the many, many generations of resistance to white supremacy and the authoritarianism that's so celebrated here.
Thank you. And do I have everybody's permission to use the acronym NEAJAC? Because the whole thing is very, very long. Thank you. So you'll know what I'm talking about. It is the Mobile Environmental Justice Action Coalition.
Okay. So you mentioned Boone County, is that in Alabama?
Tarrant.
Tarrant County is in Fort Worth, Texas. That's Fort Worth, Texas, and most of the cities that touch Fort Worth.
Does that include Dallas also?
No, Dallas and Fort Worth are two separate counties. They're about an hour apart. There's a lot of. No, it's in north central Texas.
Oh, see, I don't know my geography.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys have a really good snapshot of what it looks like to try to build power in one city, in one region. But Evan and Carla, y'all's organizations do statewide work, which has its own batch of challenges, especially with the incredible diversity in the state of Alabama. What's it like to try to engage people from every corner of the state, from small towns to big cities? And what trends or opportunities are you seeing across the state? And if you don't mind, Evan, go first.
So I think
Anyone?
We're saving our batteries.
that's smart. I think it's an interesting time. Alabama, in Mississippi, you basically have Jackson as the urban, and then you have like the Delta for culture, and then down on the Gulf Coast. But in Georgia, but Alabama, the way that we have these population centers along 65 and along the 85 corridor, and then other places like Dothan, like Talladega, and Gaston over in there, and Florence, it makes for a place where you really do have these very deep pockets of culture. That I've always loved, and I say that because, I went to college here, grew up here, most of my career has been, I've been to all the counties, all 67 of the counties. Now I haven't made that trip since the mid-2000s. So my last time, I was still relying on that information from when I was organizing and spending a lot of time in the car, eating gas station food and riding around. But more recently, I had a chance to get back in the car and start checking on members that are in the northern part of the state. And it's been really interesting to see how much North Alabama really feels more affluent now and more resourced. I have to say this it feels like when I cross the line in between South Carolina and North Carolina, or you feel it when you're driving up into certain parts of Virginia versus others. You just see stop after stop. If I need to stop, there's all of these hotels. And so like driving from Huntsville to Florence now feels very different than what it felt like just maybe, what was that, 2006, 2007. And I think that's pointing at where the state is headed. As far as the population growth, the strength of the economy. And no, we're not ready for it because most of our nonprofit infrastructure, most of our political parties and government stuff is pretty much still tied to this Montgomery-Birmingham dynamic. which it's going to be real interesting to see that be challenged and to see folks in North Alabama find their feet as political influencers. And I think it's going to be good for us. I think having more competition, both in the civic engagement, social advocacy world, is going to be as healthy as it is having it within our legislature. And I think it's really good when I hear about the work in Mobile and everything that's going on with the environmental work. A lot of what they've been doing in the environmental community with environmental justice, when they got out after the Gulf oil spill, they laid the groundwork for policies that have now come to bear because of this current federal administration and appointments they've made within the EPA. And so if y'all have been following some of the money that was released through the infrastructure package or was being released through the Inflation Reduction Act, you have trillions of dollars that are being made available for state level spending, municipal level spending, even nonprofits. A lot of it is based on environmental justice work and some of those theories of how to actually make communities more efficient and also help the planet at the same time. And so Mobile contributed to that. So Mobile is going to be finding their voice just as North Alabama, well, not that they haven't all, they're the oldest part of the state, but finding voice within this particular climate, a more amplified voice as North Alabama is. I think that's going to give the folks who've just been used to having influence, and I'm from Montgomery, and most of my mother's side, they're from Lowndes County, so I'm from one of those kind of quasi-political families, and I'm saying we don't need to have all this influence. There needs to be more of a diverse field of leadership development in this state. I think that's going to be the best all around for our development.
So I'm going to try to answer the question, but it may sound like I'm not answering the question. And I don't have the amazing organizing background of this group. When I became executive director at Alabama Appleseed, there were 4 of us, and we were trying to cover the state. And thankfully, we had an organizer on staff, an amazing young man named Dana Sweeney, who could convince anybody to do anything, just about. I don't know if y'all maybe have heard Dana speak. But we didn't have a lot of resources or power. And my theory as a nonprofit leader was I wanted to make the state think we were bigger than we were. And so I didn't want my name out there. I wanted everybody else's name out there, because if they saw Leah and Dana and Phil and maybe a board member and then Carla every now and then, we looked a lot more powerful than we were. And as we've been able to grow, I have brought on team members who can speak to different constituents, different communities. I'm a nerdy, middle-aged white lady lawyer. There are certain groups that I'm persuasive with. I have a whole group of 80-something retired white male lawyers who look to me for guidance, and some of them are influential, so I can convince them to call their legislators and try to make change. But I needed to hire formerly incarcerated people. I needed to hire people impacted by the abuses in the courts and the fines and fees issues that John spoke with. And that's how we've been able to reach into different communities, is the communicators, the emissaries from Appleseed need to speak the language of the communities that we are trying to lift up, that we are trying to change policy for. And as a 52-year-old white woman, I can't always do that. And I recognize that. So we now have 2 formerly incarcerated people on our staff. Our community navigator, Callie Greer, who's from the Montgomery-Selma area and is a powerful speaker. And then our reentry coordinator, a man named Ronald McKeithen, who spent 37 years incarcerated and is, in my opinion, one of the best public speakers in this state right now. He just slays them. Kiwanis Club, Rotary, he's amazing. So that doesn't really talk about the geography of the state as much as the economic and racial diversity and how a policy organization needs to reflect the people who we are trying to serve. And many of the people we are trying to serve are harmed by our criminal punishment system. And so we have been really intentional about trying to get families of incarcerated people and even incarcerated people, their stories and their lives in front of lawmakers. So I'll tell one story about a family that you would never think would impact policy. It's an older couple, very conservative Church of Christ couple from up in Decatur. And when I first started working to get people out of prison who are under these life without parole sentences under our habitual felony offender law, the first client I worked with was a man named Alvin Kennard. He served 36 years for a robbery. And the story of his release ended up being in the news, and I got a text from a very conservative legislator in the Alabama Senate. And he said, "Congratulations, I hope you can do more of these." And I thought, wow, he thinks that? So what am I going to do with that information? Well, it turned out he had a constituent whose son was in a similar situation. This was a very religiously conservative, evangelical, white family, retired from like Redstone Arsenal or somewhere like that, who had a son serving a life sentence and enduring really horrific prison conditions. And they had reached out to their state senator, and that one family helped educate this state senator. I'm not going to name any names because just got to be careful. But he has remained engaged about this issue of excessive sentencing and over-incarceration. We've worked on bills together. We haven't got anything over the finish line. But if not for that family's story and their willingness to get their church elders and other people engaged about this issue, more than likely this particular senator would not care. And it is very possible that he's going to be co-sponsor of a bill that we're moving right now. And so using families who are broken, who are hurt, who are struggling because their children are suffering in our prisons, and making sure that they have a voice has been a big part of our work. And there are families who have lost loved ones in prison, who have been hurt by our over-punitive policies all across the state, and they contact our office, and we try to make sure that they understand they have a voice. They deserve to be heard by our lawmakers, and we try to give them the tools to do that.
So I've heard a lot of you talk about a similar theme, bringing citizens who are affected in Africatown, pastors who are speaking to their city council, that it's really important for us to reach out, educate, engage, and activate people in every corner of the city, that we can't do it even if we get Huntsville, Mobile, Montgomery, Birmingham activated. We've got to get the people on the ground. Can you speak a little bit more to that, Ramsey, and specifically what your work has been, not just the legacy pollution, but also your recent work concerning new developments in Africatown?
Yeah, so Africatown has this amazing history. I'm assuming everyone in here has heard of Africatown. Okay. If you're unfamiliar with it, or even if you are familiar with it but haven't seen it, I really encourage everyone to see the Netflix documentary Descendant.
That's very good.
Which delves into the rediscovery of the last slave ship brought to North America and the community that was founded by some of its surviving shipmates. And I use that word deliberately to describe them as a cohort, not simply as enslaved individuals, but as a community that came together again after enslavement, many returning from other places to be with each other due to that shared experience. Africatown suffers from 7 major source operating pollution permits. Those are the biggest pollution permits that the federal government affords. There are 3 major transmission pipeline systems, 1 large natural gas system, 2 large crude oil systems, above ground storage tank farm underneath the historic Africatown, underneath the Africatown Bridge. 4 state and federal highways, 3 national railways, and 1 state port railway. The port itself is due immediately south of the community. It's surrounded by 3 sides by navigable waterways, so the waterfront is heavily industrialized around the community. After we won, I use that deliberately just to describe the process of we shut out the tank farms from being developed. It was kind of a stalemate in a lot of ways because the price of oil collapsed in October 2014. Investors pulled out. But we won, and there was sort of an internal pivot. It was obvious that there was a lot of need in the community. The city administration had changed hands from the first black mayor of Mobile, Sam Jones, to Sandy Stimson, the current mayor, and who came in on kind of the Tea Party wave in 2013. And the previous mayor, Sam Jones, had committed the city in a number of ways due to the intervention of fair housing agencies and community development work to develop a neighborhood plan for Africatown. So it took some saber rattling with the incoming administration to say, no, you're legally obligated to do this by the then laws. They were all gutted by Ben Carson when the federal administration changed, right? But under the Obama administration, there were really clear guidelines, and the city had committed in writing to doing this. We got a neighborhood plan. It was underfunded, but it does exist. And it described a lot of basic changes to the residential areas or ways to shore up the residential integrity of the community. But it really ignored all of the industries surrounding it, even though the Africatown planning area was a huge geographic expanse, about 3 square miles, stretching up into all the industrial area and out to the waterfront, because the community had described the waterfront as being historically important. So long and short of it, we wanted to find pathways through zoning to afford the community access to the water again. And the city began a process of rewriting the zoning code to update it from 1968, and we intervened very steadily and consistently over the course of 5 years to, basically getting very, very, very small incremental adjustments every every iterative wave of the legislation to finally, during an election year, getting a major shift in the attitude from the administration, basically reconciling that our organizing didn't go away during the pandemic. We were still there in 2021, that there was a narrative that we were driving because the film hadn't come out, but it was gonna come out. And so there was sort of like a gut check. They didn't want to fight us. We were prepared to fight. And that's the story of our little tenacious group. Is just when we started, it was really clear that everyone had told every person in that community, there's no point in fighting the above ground storage tank. They're gonna do what they wanna do. They're gonna put those 50 above ground storage tanks across the street from your precious school. And there's nothing you can really do about it. And those of us that are advocates said, of course there's things you can do. You can go downtown and tell them what you think. And, oh, no, don't do that. I do that, and it's really hard, and you're not going to get anywhere. You should just leave it to me, and I'll do the best I can. And whoopsie daisy, it happened. That story is over in terms of me, Jack, representing Africatown interests and Africatown residents, and then empowering Africatown residents to go downtown, tell them what they think, and then have downtown deal with it instead of going through intermediaries that haven't been doing the proper representation of the integrity of their interests, right? So we got a lot in the zoning fight, and it was a hard slog, but we won some major concessions, including some permanent protections, so permanent as far as the Alabama law goes, in the zoning code. For the residential integrity, to where there's this persistent fear that if they lost houses, and there's a lot of blighted houses, and the housing loss has been really dramatic and awful. If they lost a lot of houses, that the land would be swooped up by industry and turned into heavy industry. So we created what we call the Africatown Safety Zone. And it's a zoning overlay within the Africatown planning area that applies to all currently and many previously residential zoning areas, and puts dozens and dozens and dozens of land use restrictions on them that require consultation through the planning department of the city, which politicizes any potential development and in a way that the community can favorably intervene with and say that goes against the plan. And basically, we've stayed committed to the idea if it's not in writing, it's not real, and zoning is real, and it's something you have to contend with. And as long as you have, someone that can watch the city processes, we can bird dog development in a way that can work out favorably for the residential interests. And that's been kind of our North Star for most of our functioning, is watching what happens at downtown and spreading the word and getting folks present.
And how is there some special recipe to actually get people, and this is also for you, Shalela, to actually engage on that level and show up? Because there's people in this room from all over the state, from Troy and Florence and Anniston, who are saying, yes, we have these significant issues in our community, but I just can't get anybody to start showing up. How do you get people to the table that are willing to stand up and speak out? What are some things that you've tried that have been successful, or even mistakes that you've made that you would suggest people don't try?
We focus on educating them, because what we have found out is that people don't know what's going on in their city. They don't know what's going on in Montgomery. I feel like maybe the people in Montgomery might be more informed, but don't know what bills are being introduced, what resolutions are being introduced on the city council level. So we focus on educating them and making them aware on how these decisions that are being made by those that we elected, how it impacts them. So if you let them know and kind of explain to them how they can and possibly will be affected, then they have a reason to possibly want to advocate. We've also kind of given them talking points, helped them with whatever it is that they're going to say, and kind of prepared them. And so they feel a little confident when it comes to speaking in front of the city council. Some good things have came out of the pandemic. So we stream our city council meetings on YouTube, and they stay up there permanently. So we're able to show them examples of people advocating for a variety of issues, so that they know, hey, it's being done. This isn't just like something new. But basically preparing them and educating them and letting them know that, if they have any questions, you're there for them. But letting them know that we need to take ownership, because if we don't do anything, decisions are going to be made that are impacting us, and then later on down the road, we'll feel the burn of it.
If I can add, the whole, a lot of folks' rationale from around the region for leaning into Africatown as this important symbol of resistance is predicated on the story itself. And it's a cultural identity. People identify with the cultural story, and then wherever they fit in with it, whether however it works for you internally. MEJAC has been really committed from the very beginning to operating as a consensus-based horizontal organization, to be collaborative, to recognize everybody's voice, to enfranchise. We spend a lot of time in just in conversation, right, and talking through things, and I think contextualizing these complex bureaucratic systems as in the story voice. That's at least how I approach it. For me to tell people how it's impacting them is one thing, but for people to feel it and to encourage leadership development at that one-on-one level, and making sure that people are like driving people that need it, get them to the place. Show up before and after, and be there for them as a friend, and just availing yourself as a mini advocate or a coach. Those things are the sort of things that I think have really worked for us really well. Is that cultural affinity and like person to person level of organizing and building a network and a fabric of sympathetic stories that they're all informed together. Everyone knows everybody that's gone downtown and spoken. And then they all have a collective story that they can then tell others, and I feel like that's really what's netted us, especially among younger, skeptical and rightly cynical people. Why does this even matter? Well, it matters because it took a small group, and that small group became a bigger group, and that bigger group got something that actually fundamentally changed the power dynamics.
So I need to, based on something you mentioned, give a shout out to the league, because we started the Alabama channel. that is now recording and preserving all of the state legislature sessions, so that if you want to know what's going on in Montgomery, you can always go look, see what they're up to. We've talked a lot about what's going on in the state, but Evan, I definitely want to touch on the significant national action that's happening. You're the lead plaintiff in what was Merrill versus Milligan, now Allen versus Milligan, and it's a Supreme Court case challenging Alabama's 2021 congressional redistricting plan. It's been argued in front of the Supreme Court. Can you talk about what motivated you to bring the suit against Alabama and kind of tell us where it stands right now?
Sure. So to my left is another co-plaintiff that you just heard from, Shalela. Now, as you've heard her talk and you heard about her background, if in 5 years, 10 years, she wanted to run for Congress, does it seem like she should have the opportunity to do that
Yes.
and be taken seriously as a candidate?
Yes.
I would think so. I think there are other people between Birmingham, West Alabama, and Mobile, all the way to the Georgia line almost, who deserve the same shot. The way our state is set up, if you don't live in District 7, one of our 7 congressional districts, if you're a black person and unless you live in District 7, let me say it like that, you don't really have a viable shot in a congressional race. And our lawsuit just very simply is arguing that the state's commitment to race-based policymaking that actually disfavors Black Alabamians and devalues the vote of Black Alabamians is the only reason that we have that type of system. We have the population here in this state, there's 5 million people, 27% are African American. 1 out of 7 of our congressional districts have a majority voting age Black population. 1 out of 7 is less than 27%. That's almost half less. That's 14%. So we have, just on math terms, if you have a second district, that brings us closer into alignment with the actual population. Now, that's not enough. I don't want to lie to y'all and say, oh, all you have to do is show population, and it's like Sesame Street. That's not really, you got to show other things. But over the course of the litigation, those other things were shown by our attorneys. Thank you. And to the point that the lower federal panel, there were 2 judges from here in Birmingham in the Northern District and 1 from Atlanta, from the Court of Appeals. 2 were appointed by President Trump. So these aren't the biggest fans of voting rights. They were, they ruled on the behalf of the plaintiffs unanimously, all 3 judges, that we had overwhelmingly shown that the state of Alabama was violating Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act according to standing congressional law and standing Supreme Court precedent. And then what happened, and there were a lot of very interesting things that happened after that ruling. That court actually ordered the state of Alabama to, within 14 days, produce a congressional map that featured at least 2 districts that had a majority voting age Black population, or as close to it as possible. The state refused, et cetera, et cetera. So the case was argued at the Supreme Court in October of last year, and we're waiting on the outcome. They typically, most of the time, should release their opinions. They should be done releasing opinions at least by the last Thursday or maybe Friday of June. But Supreme Court doesn't really have written rules in that. They have their own internal policies, so they can deviate from that. And on rare occasion, they can announce a special what they call like a post end of session sort of release of an opinion. So unless they do that with our opinion, we should hear it sometime between now and that last Thursday, Friday in June.
You think we're gonna get a shadow docket on that? I just heard about that on the news.
So that they did do a shadow docket on when the federal panel asked them or ordered them to do it to remake the map in 14 days. Kavanaugh wrote the majority of 5-4 opinion shadow docket in favor of the state, which was highly unusual for the particular type of case it was. They can't shadow docket what they already asked the lawyers to give an oral argument for. So the lawyers went up and did that whole thing on October 4th of last year. So they're gonna have to give an actual opinion. It's just a matter of when. When we first started, as we've been doing outreach about the case, we would say, okay, like if I was giving this talk in February, I would say, hey, we have between now and in late June to get this opinion. The earlier we get the opinion, the better it is for the plaintiffs. The longer they hold it, just reading, the way that you saw what happened last year with the Dobbs opinion, they tend to hold those kinds of opinions that overturn precedent until that last calendar day of their traditional session. So we're almost, we're a little bit away from June, and we haven't received the opinion yet, but we could get it anytime between then and now. And it's just something, y'all have been working at this in the league for a while. Y'all know about this case, y'all know about the companion cases, you know about why having strong federal protection for voting rights is important for women, why it's important for all of the cultural groups represented up here now and throughout our state, and why that all makes us feel more safe and actually have a healthier and safer planet. Y'all know that. I don't have to convince y'all of that. I hope y'all know. I think y'all know it. I know Robin Buckley will take y'all outside and talk some sense into you if you don't. So, so you know all of that. The question is, how do we grow our influence on people in this state who may not ever be willing to join the league or any of our organizations, seated up here. And that's really the task. Is I think we have to ask ourselves, do we want to influence the culture? Are we able to influence people without them joining us all the way? It's an uncomfortable question to ask as a nonprofit person, because we're pretty much funded. We are assessed as valuable based on how we grow donations and members. Sometimes if we have certain outcomes with policies and programs, which it should be starting with programs, but that's kind of how we're assessed. And I think we're at a time now where we might want to think more about, does everybody have to join the Beatles in order to enjoy the White Album? Do you have to be a part of the Wu-Tang Clan in order to enjoy Cream or any of those classic songs? Do you have to be a part of the Georgia Mass Choir to enjoy their rendition of Amazing Grace? Probably not. So those are things that I think, we have the technology now. Alabama Channel is an amazing demonstration of that. You don't have to join the league to benefit from that, but the value that it adds to the community is a testament to the ingenuity and the innovation of this organization. I think there are some other things that we're gonna have to explore regardless of the outcome of our case, because we're in a space where voting rights are being narrowed. And there are a finite number of things that we can do as far as legal structure to respond to that. We can get a constitutional amendment at the federal level. We can rewrite this state constitution. We can get John Lewis passed, an Alabama Voting Rights Act, the Freedom to Vote Act passed at the congressional level, and then a similar type of package at the local, state, and level here in Alabama. But we know all of that is about 10 years off for us. So how do we grow the movement of people that can dig in and commit and say, we're not leaving until this happens, from innovative things that don't require them to join, but to actually support and be inspired by our work.
So Carla, I'll come back to actually speaking specifically about your issues in a second, but since Evan brought it up, I'd like to ask both you and Ramsey, with environmental justice and the criminal legal reform, you get told no a lot. All these goals, most of them are years and years off. What gives you hope when you're fighting these battles? What keeps you going?
I'm still thinking about joining the Beatles to enjoy the White Album. That's like the best metaphor. You can come up with so many versions of that with different bands too. This is going to sound strange, but I do have hope with regards to criminal justice reform. It's based, a little bit about what John Archibald was talking about. And I'll be super narrow here because we have one more bill. We got the driver's license bill passed. And a number of groups starting about 4 years ago started working on reform of the Habitual Felony Offender Act, which is the 3 strikes law, which has packed our prisons and it's punishing people for crimes that happened decades ago when they, in some cases, didn't do anything worse than I did when I was 18 or 20 years old, frankly. But we just really like to punish people. So at Appleseed, we started looking at these old cases and realizing a lot of people were serving life without parole for crimes with no physical injury whatsoever. And people, even judges and DAs, were kind of surprised about that, what was going on in the 80s and 90s. Wow, we were locking up people forever for a convenience store robbery. So we slowly worked with DAs in, yes, mainly Jefferson County, but also Russell County and Tallapoosa County, surprisingly. I will find advocates where I can find them, and if I don't have to be the face or the voice of a case, that's fine. I can get another lawyer to talk to a DA, and sometimes I do that, and nobody even really knows I'm involved. Stealth lawyering. So we've gotten 13 people out of prison, and I learn from their lives and their stories about how to be a better advocate in the legislature. So we worked on this habitual felony offender reform for about 3 years, and Representative Chris England, who's just an absolute warrior, was a great bill sponsor. But every time we would go to the House Judiciary Committee, we would have lawmakers say, "You're letting murderers and rapists out of prison." And we knew we could not win on a bill that included relief for people convicted of murder or people convicted of sex crimes, even though I believe there are people convicted of those crimes that deserve another chance, that are some of the most rehabilitated people in our prisons, that are mentors to others, and I hope I live long enough to help some of them get out as well. But where we found an opening is these non-physical injury crimes, and there's hundreds of people who will die in prison for crimes where maybe they didn't even see a victim. Maybe it was burglary of an empty house. And so, using the stories of our clients and our research of similar cases, we crafted a much more limited bill this session. And it says, if you're serving life without, your crime involved no physical injury, and you've served a certain number of years, then a judge should be able to review your case, especially if you reach a certain age, because at age 50, criminality declines. And lo and behold, that bill passed out of the House Judiciary Committee a couple of weeks ago. And it was in part because we got former Congressman Spencer Backus to testify. I know. You gotta dance with the ones who brung you. Isn't that a phrase in politics from Texas? Well, Spencer's brung us on this bill. He has developed a friendship with an incarcerated man who he is advocating for. So we got this bill out of committee, and then that just lit a fire under Spencer Backus. I told y'all I can charm the old white men. And he started calling Republicans in the House and started making noise on right-wing radio about it. And that bill got on the House calendar. And this is a time where most states are pulling back on criminal justice reform. We're overreacting to perceived rises in crime, and we're wanting to make the same mistakes we made in 1994. And so to pass reform in Alabama that would let hundreds of people out of our unconstitutional prisons would be shocking. So we got a vote on the House floor, and took everything in me not to get a prescription of Valium to deal with all of this. But last Wednesday, that bill made it out of the Alabama House, 64-37. Yeah. And it's because I'm really good at hiring people, and I have these amazing policy people, including like a 25-year-old from Decatur who just graduated with her master's in social work, got UNA connections. She's brilliant. Another man who was an LSA lawyer. So shout out to LSA. So they're doing really great work. And that is the bill that is we believe, going to be on the Senate Judiciary Committee. So we got the Attorney General, because of Spencer Backus's influence, to basically stand down and be neutral on the bill. Because I was told over and over again, I even started telling my staff, we're going to float this bill this year, but it's not going anywhere, so y'all don't get your hopes up. And then Spencer got involved, and then the AG decided not to kill it. So here we are. Last thing I'll say about that is I've had to be pretty ruthless in telling other organizations, we need you to be quiet about this bill, because that's how you get things done in Alabama. And it's really hard for me to do that. But if I had the same organizations that are working on, fighting the bad trans bills and some of the anti-CRT stuff, they were also jumping up and down in support of my bill, it would kill it. So I've started referring to our place on the kind of the spectrum of reform as we live on Appleseed Island, where we can't always acknowledge our friends and people we agree with on other issues. But sometimes that's what it takes to get things done in Alabama. But it does give me hope, the movement of this bill, and I'm trying not to get my hopes up too much because it's still a long slog. But I just think it's an example of when you're willing to work in a bipartisan way, which is what we have to do, because as y'all know, we have a Republican super duper majority in the State House, and we cannot pass anything with only Democratic support.
Beautifully.
That was a good note of hope. There's the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Right now, we haven't begun to even see the bare beginning of what that will do. We're talking like New Deal plus funding levels of the federal government, unlike anything any of us have seen since that time. I mean, maybe the Great Society expansions, but not even of that nature, because it's so much of the bills are hyper targeted and hyper focused and with much more accountability than what came out of the Great Society programs, which give us all the community development block grant money that go to cities that spend it all on what they want and not what the communities are supposed to. All that money is supposed to go to making poverty, to eliminate poverty, right? We know what it goes to. So that gives me hope, knowing that communities like Africatown, as slow as it is, in terms of building the internal capacity to even begin to conceptualize what a huge all this huge investments that are out there for communities just like Africatown. What does that even mean? To get past those conversations and to get residents interfacing directly with counterparts at the Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, EPA, Department of Justice, that is no small feat. And really all the legislation is designed to do, and what the best iterations of federal programs should be doing with communities that qualify for these sorts of things, is building a class of government contractors that are, coming in with no experience and can become proficient and successful government contractors. And it's not, it's all the soft skills or whatever you want to describe for like how young people transition into the workforce. Like there's a huge learning curve when it comes to federal contracts, and having the environmental justice offices and all of the corresponding minority business division or minority, however they're described in all the old terminology from the legislation that formed them. And many are changing their language now. Like Department of Energy has a diversity and minority inclusion office that's probably going to change its name to Energy Justice, which makes a lot more sense in terms of like what environmental justice is doing at EPA, right? Those sorts of things are giving me hope that there are resources available, that there's technical assistance available, that we can mobilize with the limited articulation that we have, because really we're going around the state. We're going around the counties. We're going around the cities, because the legislation, so much of the legislation is designed to be able to be accessible to nonprofit community-based organizations. And so there's all this hope and opportunity, and it's really just connecting the dots and finding the champions within the communities themselves that want to take on these huge, no small tasks of becoming government contractors. At whatever phase of life you're in, you're not really ready for what that is, but it's possible. And, you know, a lot of folks in philanthropy, radical philanthropy in particular, will describe philanthropy as the process of reparations by another name. You know, I don't think that it's out of the realm of possibility or out of the realm of you know, what's acceptable to describe these sorts of programs as an approach. It's not what reparations is, but it's an approach towards that process of rendering services to those that that deserve them at the scale at which they can be received. And right now they require the intervention of, you know, skilled facilitators and technical assistants and whatever to make these connections happen, but it's possible. And I feel like there's a small army of community advocates that are ready to be mobilized. I think a lot of them are in this room, right? To make sure that these services, this delivery of government services that have been promised since 1997's environmental justice executive order, that we're a quarter century into that executive order, and this delivery of services, this administration found a way to put the language together to make it direct. It doesn't have to go through your mayor. Not the word that came to my mouth. But it doesn't have to go through that nonsense. You can cut through it and make it work. It's an uphill battle for most communities, and it won't work everywhere, but it's possible for some. And where we can set examples and model leadership, I think that we can begin to see, especially with how philanthropy follows the federal policies in a lot of ways, especially big philanthropy, that we'll start to see a lot of mirroring happening where we can get success with these federal programs. Those sorts of things give me hope. And, you know, whatever comes around the pipe in next year, I'm fighting. I'm fighting for what Africatown and other communities are just getting a taste of, because it's all possible, and I'm going to make sure that it's still there in 2025, because I'm not going to go through another 2017 to 2021 ever again.
God willing. So Shalela, how do you encourage people to believe in what's possible? Advice for aspiring change makers, and not just, you know, it might be a young woman in high school who's looking up to you, but it also might be newly empty nesters. The kids are gone to college or newly retired, and people who just want to get after it. What advice do you give them?
I just tell them that if we don't advocate, if we don't organize, how can we expect change? Showing them what has been done in the past via the civil rights movement and other movements. It takes uniting as one, organizing, collaborating with other organizations, and just letting them know we have a blueprint, but there's always a new way of doing things. And one of the cool things we have now is technology that helps us with advocating and spreading the word. Also focusing on just having people partner with having a mentor in the organizing realm. Sometimes you don't know how to maneuver in this space. And what I've also been focusing on personally has been collaborating with other organizers throughout the state, because I do feel like sometimes Mobile can get left behind in a lot of the work. And I do see a lot of the work being done in Montgomery and in the Birmingham area, but encouraging people who I do encounter in Mobile to reach out to people in Montgomery, Birmingham, Huntsville, attend events. So I was happy when an invitation to speak here and be on this panel was extended to me, because I was like, oh, okay, we got somebody on Mobile who's gonna be represented, and I just realized Ramsey was gonna be here last week. But letting them know that some of the issues that we have are visible in other areas of the state, and that we can't just solve the problem as a region, that we need to come together as a state to do so.
All right, we've got little bit under 10 minutes left. Got one final question for everybody. We'll just start with Carla and head down the row. And then if there's time, we'll take questions, okay? So looking in our room of wonderfully civically and politically engaged ladies and men, thinking about the needs of your organization, what would your ask of them be? What can the League and its members do to be change makers in support of your work?
Normally I have a really pat answer for that, but some of what I've heard today is kind of, I don't know, made me rethink things and think about the state in different ways. I guess I'll just kind of state the obvious, and if you are interested in following what's happened in our criminal punishment system, in our prison system, and willing to learn about the bills that would help and the reforms, anyone who can call their legislators, email their legislators in support of good bills and in opposition to bad bills is always welcome. We have a moment coming up now because the Department of Justice trial against the Department of Corrections here in Alabama is happening next year. So it's scheduled for 2024. And Alabama is the only state that has twice been sued by the federal government over conditions across our entire prison system. So the governor's office and the legislature is not really talking about this right now. They're pretending it's not happening, but it is happening. And so this is really a moment for the people of Alabama to step up and say, we're actually paying attention and we care about incarcerated people and we don't want a repeat of history yet again. So educate yourself about that issue. We'll have a ton of resources at alabamaappleseed.org, and much of our legislation will be focused on alleviating some of the issues and the crises created by those prison conditions.
The question is, what am I tasking folks with? As an environmental justice advocate, I would say, if you know of a community that you feel like has environmental justice needs and is underrepresented or is perhaps unaware or not connected with the federal government today, whatever their needs are, if it's because people silo environmentalism into these, it's pollution permits, or it's just about clean air and clean water, or it's just about a wilderness area where no people are allowed to go. Like, environment is streetlights, it's sidewalks, it's having a safe place to play, pray, to recreate, to live. And neighborhoods that don't look like other neighborhoods, that's two different environments. What needs to change in that environment? And whatever that is, if it's access to renewable energy sources, access to sidewalks and infrastructure dollars like that, or sewage, you have sewage overflows, you have wastewater systems that are failing, if it's job creation, minority business development, all that stuff has to do with how do you physically shape an infrastructure? How do you build generational wealth so neighborhoods can materially change for the people that live in them? There are opportunities today, and if you know folks that are not talking to the federal government right now, and they need to be, don't hesitate to reach out to my agency, me, and I will help navigate that process and try to meet people where they're at. The other thing I would say is dream about what we'll never get. Alabama Department of Environmental Management, do environmental justice. So what does it mean to have a state agency that will never lift a finger for any of these major federal policy goals that are playing out right now with millions, if not billions of dollars rolling out today? We need to build an environmental justice table for Alabama so that the communities that I'm speaking to, asking y'all to be in touch with, so that it won't just be me responding to their concerns, that there will be a deep bench of talent, of coaching, of leadership development, and a way to navigate all the concerns that are coming out of their communities in a meaningful way, because we can't rely on the party to do that for us. We can't rely on the state to do that for us, and we need to build that infrastructure out. And we have these wonderful, somewhat muscular, skeletal, small d Democratic coalition organizations that do this work at the grassroots scale to inform, educate, mobilize people. Environmental justice is such a big opportunity that all of these groups really need to be thinking in terms of how do we, like I said, philanthropy follows the federal policy a lot. It's time for philanthropy and charitable mindsets in Alabama to really be following where the policy is going, because there's lots of resources for it. And if we're not really doing the work, and we're not going to see the service delivery that the communities that we fought for this opportunity to even happen today, for it to really be playing out, especially in Alabama. So that think, dream, and bring your ideas, and let's build something that's worthwhile for our most vulnerable communities in the state.
My call to action would be to make sure you're having the conversations, the hard conversations outside of the league. So having those conversations with women who look like you when you are in other spaces. They may not have the same viewpoint, but letting them know that the decisions that are made by those who we elect to office and any other issues we have going on in the state, how it can impact them. So it may be hard to have those conversations. Have them within your family when you have family gatherings. And also being willing to leave what may be a safe space for you to do that necessary work. And I also want to challenge you, if the league is the only org that you are involved in, and if you have the capacity, how about you find an org that is nonpartisan as well and continue to do that work in that space as well. A lot of the orgs that I'm in, they tend to overlap with the work that I do. I'm young and I have no kids, so I have the time and the capacity for the most part. But if you have the time, take what you learn in the league and share that with other orgs and in your other spaces where there are women that look like you, so that you know that you're doing your part and that the conversations are being had.
We have an event coming up in Montgomery on June 3rd called Democracy Now or Never. Y'all have some flyers about it on your table. Please, if you're a praying person, pray for the attendees that attend that event. We're going for a crowd who wouldn't normally find their way into a formal policy discussion sort of place. And so some of these folks are coming with a lot of trauma. They're coming, we're using hip hop and other things, visual art as a part of the process to encourage people to come. But we hope that we can offer an event that's welcoming and that actually demonstrates the freedom and democracy and the celebration of public space that we're hoping we can inspire people to commit more to. And so if y'all are praying people, pray. If you are an intentional word speaking person, please do that. Whatever higher power you respond to, human or cosmic. And if y'all are folks that are inclined to volunteer with the table that'll be there, I think the league is gonna have a table down there. If y'all know some vendors who might wanna do some children's activities or things of that nature that day, all of the information, the follow up is on the card. That would be the most timely thing I could offer to y'all as far as help.
All right, well, it is 3:30, Kathy.
Is
No,
it 3:30?
it is 3:30.
I thought we were having fun. Q&A, right? It's been a long, you guys have been talking a long time. It's been wonderful.
Do you have a few minutes if they have questions?
I thought we had a little Q&A time.
Does anybody have any questions?
But it doesn't have, it's about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A.
Okay, does anybody have questions?
I just want to thank you for telling me about Africa 15. To make myself a note to learn more.
Watch Descendants.
Yes, I made that note too.
Yes, I've learned about the movie from Ramsey and it was fantastic. Let me go back there for a minute.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for everything. You all are wonderful, and I know most of you. I don't know you, Shalela, but I'm really glad to just get to know you better and hear more. And I was wondering, Evan, if you could say a little more about the sort of long game of Alabama Forward, and how the C4 table ties into that, and really thinking of how because a lot of the challenges we all face in this work is the people that are elected aren't really the people that we would like to be elected. Now, we're nonpartisan, so I'm not talking about, getting involved in electoral politics, but I know that, when I first heard about Alabama Forward and got involved through Alabama Rivers Alliance that I work for, I was just really excited to think about the progressive change that I know has happened in some other states. And I recently went to the State Voices convening, which helped me learn more about the sort of national infrastructure around this as well. So if you could just say a little more about that.
Yep. So for what we need to accomplish in our coalition between now and 2030 is really base building, enough base building to invite new people, yes, into our organizations as members and volunteers, as small scale contributors, but mostly in terms of folks that are willing to vote, volunteerism on the ground, and people who are more routinely engaging information that are produced by members of our coalition, to grow our level of influence in the state, because we can't really shift. So that's one piece, base building. Another piece is looking at, initially we were being basically tasked with, y'all need to figure out voter registration and voter turnout for Alabama. And that's a hard thing to do because a lot of people aren't inspired to participate. And they're not inspired because of all of the things, the prison, all of the things that we've said up here, the very state apparatus, it demoralizes people. So why would you then go out and vote to participate in it? So one of the things that our nonprofits are doing here is when they're valued according to voter turnout in a state that is starting where we are, we're going to lose that game until we don't. And it's hard to convince people to support something when the whole story that's being told is one of losing. So one thing that we have to do is use data technology and canvassing tools and things of that nature. At the Alabama Rivers Alliance, for example, every month, how many different lives do y'all touch with some type of action, organized demonstration, training? The same with these organizations up here. If we're only defining them by one narrow set of rules, then it discounts, and the same thing. It's like the same thing I was saying about what our maps are doing. And so we have to be able to have infrastructure that is counting the number of touches per week that organizations are involved in. The cool thing about today is there's so many, you can use this, and an organizer or a ground level community health worker, volunteer, whatever, they can touch a button every time they answer a phone and touch with somebody, talk with somebody, and then it goes into something that tracks that. So it's not something we have to figure out, but it's going to take an intense amount of training, education within our coalition to help people find the right tools that work for what they do. That's a big part of our lift. Also, being able to translate our agenda into broader language. So when we talk about civic engagement, that's not like, what does that mean for most people? When we talk about democracy and freedom and democracy, what does that mean for most people? If I'm not able to have health care, if I'm dealing with somebody that's in the prisons we talked about, living around the type of pollution we're talking about, we have to figure out how to define the things that we want people to actually to be aspiring for and put that in language. That's not something we have to invent. There are popular education resources nationally and in our region that are willing to help us build curriculum that's accessible to folks across levels of education. And so working with our member organizations to produce that sort of content will be a critical component, both of the base building work and also figuring out how to use that technology to count what we're doing. When we can do that, then we can go to our community members with a narrative of victory and strength. We can say, here are these organizations you should be hopeful about. You were demoralized and you were upset about what your state or what your county did or did to you or did not do for you. Here are some heroes and sheroes right in your midst this is what they did with $10,000. This is what they did with 50,000, 100, whatever the amount of money is, and really break down what the value add of that to the lives of the community. That will help us grow our base. That will help us become more strategic in the goals that we set. And then that sets up the conversation that you're wanting to have that we can't have in here, because Kathy will cut off my mic if we start talking about C4 objectives in here. But that does set up the space to then talk more pointedly about more partisan objectives.
I have a question, sort of, still C3, but I have a question.
Somebody's in front
Oh,
of
you
you.
go.
Quickly to Carla. The bill that just got out of the House now has to go to the Senate. How will we know the Senate bill number, when to contact our senators, and some talking points?
So we have an action alert system that emails people. If somebody sends me an address of all the emails in this group, I'm happy to communicate with this group. Maybe everybody in the room, though, doesn't want an email from me. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for those of you who use those platforms. And I'm happy to get your contact information directly and send it to you. Thank you for asking.
I was gonna say, I actually signed up for the action alerts on Appleseed.
Okay.
Mhm.
I was gonna say, I've signed up for the action alerts from Appleseed, so it's kind of like Alabama Rise. You get a call to action from them directly.
Thank you.
So can I ask my question? All right, I think this may be mostly Evan, but I was wondering about all of the groups. One of the things that I've started as a leader of the Alabama League, I start realizing that when you look at the administrative calendar for the 2024 elections, January 5th is when the ballots are going to be ready for people to start voting absentee. And I know HB 209 is going to probably put a wrinkle into that, but one of the things that I'd really like to get organized on is a get out the vote effort. And I'm just wondering, how do you see your organizations really getting engaged and trying to get more people to the polls? Because turnout, like Shalela said, turnout's just really, really sad. But even though presidential elections are the biggest years.
Well, we have between now and January to do a lot of listening, a lot of what Ramsey was saying as far as people aren't going to come out, turn out to vote just because they should or because it's the American thing to do. The folks that we need to join the base of voters are not in this room. Some of them are working at Walmart right now, everywhere else where they have to leave their shift to work. So they have to have the whole state is fighting against them getting to that poll and submitting that ballot. So, what is the culture of inspiration that actually helps them, that makes sense for their social network? That's one thing. That's where listening comes in. Another is there are small businesses and there are artists and there are people that we can actually be working with more frequently who have a lot of influence on this same group of folks. The same group of folks, if there's a certain type of blues festival, they might have to call out of work, but they'll find a way to get there. And that's our niche community sort of festival. Some of these crawfish broil people, why are you here? I thought where are the kids? Hey, that's what I like. So if it becomes, when we're able to build relationships with those influencers, there's a certain amount of, people aren't gonna just do something because they say it, but they can help till the soil. But they're not gonna do it for free. Same way none of us are gonna do work for free. Some of these, and we just can't go around handing money to somebody because people tend to like their personality. There has to be a reason why we work together. What's a way to do that? Festivals, documentaries, hiring folks to come like events like this, and only don't just listen to folks like us on the panel. Have you some singers in here, have you some visual artists. They'll do it for $250. if we start doing more of that, then those folks know our organizations and they'll promote what we're doing. Because they want to stay, you know what I mean? It's more organic. We have time between now and in January. And then of course we'll still be doing the same traditional get out the vote, planning that groups like us do. But without that preparatory work, we're gonna end up talking to the same people, which is kind of what we need to be going 5% up, every quarter if we can. But what would y'all add to that though?
Right now, I am completing a fellowship, the Black Southern Women Collaborative, in conjunction with Faith in Action, and majority of the 10 women selected are from Montgomery and Birmingham. I'm the only person from Mobile, and what we're doing is we're supposed to interview or somewhat listen to 250 people. And the key word is listen, because I know we had the lowest voter turnout in like the past 20 years with our midterm elections that we had in November. But like Evan said, we go around, we tell people to vote or whatever, but sometimes we need to find out why didn't they vote. Was it because they didn't know there was an election? Was it because they felt like their vote doesn't count? And so a key component of the work that we're doing, and if we start early enough, is listening to them. And so maybe you can go to the precinct in your county that had the lowest voter turnout and use van and canvass that area and get with those people to figure out what was the problem. And so a key component to maybe us getting past the issue with low voter turnout is listening to the people to understand why they didn't vote, and then come up with your problem. Come up with your solution from there.
Yeah, personal touch is everything. We have the demographic data to know who isn't turning out for what. With Africatown, we're focused on storytelling and narrative organizing, and that's creating a lot of sympathetic interest in the community, and so identifying model leadership, especially among young people, to lift up the stories of the young people in the neighborhood, and watch let their lived experience of like what motivates them to go to the polls or not actually like play out in real time, and have those conversations kind of in a more public way. I think that we have to be okay with that initial discomfort of hearing people tell you why they will not vote, right?
I'll just add that all of our clients go through a process of getting their voting rights back once they are released, and they work with a wonderful lawyer named Dory Miles at Greater Birmingham Ministries. So we don't do much voter engagement work, but we always make sure that formerly incarcerated people have the opportunity to vote. So we've added, 11 folks to the voter rolls in Alabama so far.
11 voters. Everyone counts. One last question from Linda, and I apologize to anybody else who didn't have a chance, but we're going to let these folks get off the hook in a minute.
Yeah, first I want to say thank you very much. This is very educational. This question really is to Carla. I started following Appleseed about 2 years ago because I have a background in criminal justice and prisons. And my question is something I've never been able to quite get my head around, was if there was an intersection between the SPLC, the ACLU, and the Innocence Project with Appleseed, or is it just a standalone entity?
We have worked with all of those entities. Sometimes we decide for strategic reasons for a particular bill that we need to go it alone. They do different work. So Innocence Project, like its name says, is trying to exonerate people who were wrongfully convicted. Super important work. A lot of other organizations, including Appleseed and EJI, our clients aren't necessarily innocent. They are over-sentenced, or we believe they deserve another chance. So that's not the criteria for getting representation. SPLC and ACLU, I just feel like their issues are so much broader than ours, so we can connect on a few things. But at Appleseed, like I said, we've just become really hyper-focused on this intersection between poverty and criminal justice and mass incarceration, because that's where we see the biggest window right now in opportunity. There's not really another Alabama organization that is focused exclusively on criminal justice reform.
Okay. Thank you guys so much.